Netherlands. We're on part 2 of here, much to cover. We're going to try and speak about more Rabbanim, more about the 1600s, 17th century respectively, and maybe the start of the 18th century, the earlier part of the 1800s, and there's so much to get through. This is going to be a multiple part series, so watch your space over here for some fantastic content. We'll just be Hi, yes, sorry about that. We're just going to continue over here. Okay, so we are exploring the history. Remember, we did a part 1 just a few days ago, so this is really part 2 at the moment, and so much to cover within the country of the Netherlands. And we're going to try and go through some biography videos of some famous rabbis of yesteryear, and so on and so forth. So that's the plan for today. And we left off speaking about some great rabbis, including Rabbi Saul Levi Montira. He was a great rabbi of his time. I think he was born in the year 1596, and he passed away in the year 1660. He was a rabbi in Amsterdam. He was born in Venice, interesting enough, and I don't think he was either Sephardic or Ashkenazic, we have to point out, and was a prominent figure, let's just say, as part of the exiled Portuguese Jews. He would have various different, let's say, polemic writings, let's say specifically against Catholicism, that was very widely circulated. He was about 63 years of age when he passed away. He was a student of the famous Italian Rabbi Leon de Modena. And I think in the Spanish poem of David Levi de Barrios, he speaks of him being a native of Germany. Interesting. From the age of 13, he actually accompanied Elijah Montalto, I think famously to Paris, where he would serve as secretary at the Louvre until 1616. When I think Rabbi Montalto died, Rabbi Saul Mortera would escort the body of the physician from France to Amsterdam, where a Jewish community had been openly established, and he could have, let's just say, at that point in time, I think it was at that stage in time. So I think could have a Jewish burial. In Amsterdam, he would marry a poor Jewish orphan, because I think dowry was provided by a Jewish charity for poor women, it was reported over. This marital pattern was typical of rabbis in Amsterdam, reported over. At the time, rabbis were not desirable candidates for marriage, like in other windows of Jewish history, into rich Sephardic families. The fact that Rabbi Mortara was from Venice and not a Sephardi Jew might have also been a factor, despite, let's say, his eminence as a rabbi respectively. Now, I think it was a Sephardic congregation called Beth Jacob, or the House of Jacob, Bet Yaakov, as you could say, in Amsterdam, will elect him as a chacham in succession to the famous Rabbi Moses ben Arroyo, another rabbi we've spoken about. I believe now Rabbi Mortera was a founder of the congregational school called Keteh HaTorah, let's say in the highest class of which he taught Talmud, Gemara, and Jewish philosophy. He was a senior rabbi when the 3 Amsterdam congregations would merge in the year 1639. I'd say at that point outranking Rabbi Menashe ben Israel and receiving an annual remuneration of 600 guilders. Very interesting enough. Now, friends, anyone tuning in live, please subscribe to the channel as we're exploring the Jewish community history of the Netherlands in Holland over here. So welcome to our community, and please don't forget to subscribe. Okay, so he was a senior rabbi, obviously, of these 3 Amsterdam congregations, and the 2 rabbis had robust debates on opinions. I think Rabbi Sortera was fiercely anti-Christian, it's reported over here. Well, Menashe ben Israel sought to bridge a religious divide between Jews and Christians, particularly dissenting Protestants, very interestingly. So let's just say their robust debates would bring intervention within regards of the ma'amad, the political arm of the community, to prevent, let's say, the rabbis' disputes from becoming like a source of instability in the congregation. So that this ma'amad would also have like a specific role at that point in time. Now, it's actually interesting. He would have very famous students who we'll speak about in due course, including the famous Rabbi Moses Zacuto, rabbi we've spoken about on various occasions before. Also, Rabbi Abraham Cohen Pimentel, and famously Baruch Spinoza, who we spoke about in the last edition, who was put into excommunication, into herem. And that's interesting. Rabbi Mortera was concerned about members of the congregation, let's say, within regards to their halachic statuses within regards to Jewish law. Are they keeping it? And and so on and so forth. He instigated an investigation against a specific physician at one point in time, someone named Daniel de Prado, who was also known as Dr. Juan de Prado. I think he himself was born in Andalusia in the year 1614, who I think, very interesting enough. And there was different views at that point in time. It's actually interesting. Rabbi Morteri and another rabbi, Rabbi Isaac de Fonseca Abob, they were, I think, in correspondence to each other, if I'm not mistaken. And I think they were both members of the Ma'amad over here, which I think was it was a key time period, especially in July 1656. We're going to speak about Menashe ben Israel within regards to that. So we'll explore his works. Anyone tuning in live, we've got 42 people live. Please subscribe to the channel. We've got fantastic content over here, and you can keep up to it if you just click the subscribe button and join our community. Now, Rabbi Morteria would write various different Torah colossal works. I think some of his students published a book called the Givat Shaul, which was in Amsterdam in 1645, which was a collection of 50 sermons on the Torah, selected from 500 drashot, which he actually wrote himself, which is very interesting. Now, I think he wrote in Spanish the Tractado de la Verdad de la Ley, which was translated, I believe, into Hebrew by Isaac Gomez de Gossa, which is under the title The Torat Moshe. I believe this had 66 chapters. Also, I think, very interesting. I think, let's just say, in 66 chapters, I think there was apologetics of Judaism and there was attacks against Christianity. The work, I think, and other writings of Rabbi Morteria on immortality, revelation, I think are still in manuscript reported over. And he would give over polemical sermons in Hebrew against the Catholic Church, and they were very much published. But I think some of his Portuguese writings against Calvinism remained unpublished, reported over. Let's speak a bit about his Talmud, a great rabbi named Rabbi Moses ben Mordechai Zakuto, a rabbi we have spoken about on various occasions before here inside the series. Who was he? He was born in 1625. He passed away in 1697 in the month of October over there. And he was also known famously as the Ramaz, from the acronym. He was a Kabbalist, he was a rabbi, he was a poet. And he was born into a Portuguese Morano family in Amsterdam, and he would obviously study Judaism under Rabbi Saul Levi Morteria, if I'm not mistaken. He also studied secular subjects such as Latin language, for example, and he was as a pupil of Rabbi Morteria. He may also have been as a youth still in Amsterdam, and he might have been actually learning with Baruch Spinoza while he was younger, if I'm not mistaken. We spoke about Baruch Spinoza, who was excommunicated in a previous video, if I'm not mistaken. So he was inclined more to mysticism from his youth. At one point in time, he fasted 40 days that he might forget. And one time he fasted 40 days that he might forget the Latin which he learned, since, in his opinion, it could not be reconciled with Kabbalistic truths, reported over. To continue, let's say, his Talmudic studies, he went from Amsterdam to Poland. I think there's a letter of recommendation which was given at Venice in 1672 to delegates who had come to Italy to collect money for oppressed Polish communities. It was, I think, in this intention to make a pilgrimage to Palestine, but on the way, I think he was persuaded to remain as a rabbi in Venice, where he stayed, with the exception of a short residence visit in Padua at one point in time. Remember, Padua had a famous Jewish community there. I think from 1645 until the summer of 1673. It was then called to Mantua at a fixed salary of 300 ducats, and remained there until he passed away. And very, very interesting. Among his works include the Hen Kol HaKadash, that was actually printed in Amsterdam in 1712. Tikkun Shobabim, when time period of Shobabim at the moment, in 1740, that was in Venice. The Shuda de Dayana, I think this was in 1678 in Mantua. Kol HaRamaz, a commentary in the Mishnah. It was a collection of response, if I'm not mistaken, with decisions of the contemporaries. The Igirot HaRamaz, which contained letters of Kabbalistic content written by himself and others. The Yisod Olam, which is printed in Berlin. And he edited and amended also the Zohar in Venice in 1663. And so that was many works of his. Now, another rabbi that became the rabbi in Amsterdam was someone named Rabbi Abraham Cohen Pimentel. Who was he? He died in 1697. He was a rabbi in Amsterdam. He was a student also of Rabbi Saul Levi Morteria. He would also be the Chacham of the synagogue in Hamburg, reported over, and was initially a signature to the letter of approbation for Shabtai Tzvi. He was the author of Minchat Kohen, published in 1668, so he's a key figure of that point in time. Rabbi Menashe ben Israel was another great rabbi who would have huge connotations to Amsterdam, the Netherlands. He was better known as, he was also known as Rabbi Manuel Dias Soero, obviously better known as Rabbi Menashe ben Israel. He was a Kabbalist, he was a rabbi, he was a writer, he was a diplomat, he was a printer, he was a publisher, and the founder of the first Hebrew printing press in Amsterdam in 1626. Somebody will speak about it maybe in the next class. He was born in 1604. He passed away in 1657 in Middelburg in the Dutch Republic. At that point in time, he was only about 53 years of age, approximately. I think he was buried in the Ouderkerk aan de Amstel in Amsterdam. Now, he was born in La Rochelle. I think in 1604, he was born with the name, as we said before, Manuel de Diasuera. A year after his parents had left, let's say, mainland Portugal, because obviously with the Inquisition, and the family would move to the Netherlands in 1610. The Netherlands was in the process, middle of a process, of a religious revolt against Catholic Spanish rule throughout the 80 Years' War between 1568 to 1648. Amsterdam was an important centre of Jewish life in Europe at this time. The family's arrival in 1610 was during the 12 Years' Truce, mediated by France and England at The Hague. In Amsterdam, he would study under famous Rabbi Moshe Raphael de Gulia, who we're going to speak about. He rose to eminence not only as a rabbi and an author, but also as a printer. He established the first Hebrew press in Holland. One of the earliest works of his was the El Consolador, which was published in the year 1632, and it would win a great reputation. I think it was, let's say, an attempt to reconcile apparent discrepancies in various parts of the Hebrew Bible. And he had various correspondents were the Grand Ross of Vossios, Hugo Grotius, Petrus Sirius, Antonio Viella, and Pierre Daniel Hewitt. I think it was in 1638 he would move to Brazil, and as he still found, I think, it difficult to provide for his family in Amsterdam, he visited, I think, Dutch colony capital of Rosyth. He did not necessarily move there. One of his reasons for his financial situation, I think, improved in Amsterdam was the arrival of two Portuguese Jewish entrepreneurs, the brothers Abraham and Isaac Pereira. I think they hired Rabbi Menashe to direct a small college and academy, or yeshiva, you could say. They had founded in the city in 1644. Rabbi Menashe met the famous Antonio do Montesinos, who was a Portuguese traveller and a Murano Sephardic Jew who had been in the New World, and Montesinos convinced him of his conclusion that the South America Andres Indians were the descendants of the lost 10 tribes, apparently. Let's say that would bring about, at that point in time, a discovery that would gain a new impulse, let's say, to Rabbi Menashe's, let's say, messianic hopes. A settlement of Jews throughout the world was supposed to be a sign that Moshiach would be coming soon. I think, filled with this idea, he turned his attention to England, whence the Jews had been expelled in 1290. He worked to get them permission to settle there again, and thus hasten, let's say, one of his ideas. This would speed up the Moshiach process over there. Obviously, it didn't necessarily do that, because we're still here. How many years? We're nearly 400 years later. Moshiach still hasn't come. With 360 years or something. Okay, with the start of the Commonwealth of England, the question of the readmission of Jews had, let's say, increased Parisian support, but it was often mooted under growing desire for religious liberty. In addition, Messianic and other mystic hopes were in England at that point in time. He would have a book called The Hope of Israel, I think, which was published in Amsterdam in Latin and in Spanish. I think in 1650 the book was written in response to a 1648 letter from John Dury inquiring about Montesinos' claims. In addition to reporting Montesinos' accounts of Jews in America, the book also expressed the hope that the Jews would return to England as a way of hastening the coming of the Moshiach. Rabbi Menashe also stressed his kinship with Parliament and let's say explains himself as driven by amity for England rather than financial gain. I think it was in the year 1651 more will happen. He would offer to serve, if I'm not mistaken, at that window in time, Christina, the Queen of Sweden, as the agent of Hebrew books. The same year he met Oliver St. John and his envoys on his mission to secure an Anglo-Dutch coalition which would have Dutch citizens and thus Jews privileges and work in England. The English were impressed by, let's say, learning and manner, and advised him to formally apply for the Jewish readmission to England. I think it was in 1652. The Hope of Israel was translated from Latin into English by John Jury, or one of his associates, and it was published in London by Moses Wall, prefixed with a dedication to the Parliament and the Council of States. His account of descendants of the lost tribes being found in the New World deeply impressed public opinion and stirred up many polemics in English literature. This included the debate between Edward Spencer and Moses Wall, an MP and a scholar respectively, on Ben Israel's millennium claims and the manner in which the Jews would be converted. Now, Wall and Spencer's letters were printed in later editions of the book. Despite their historic misfortunes and movements, Rabbi Menashe characterized as a condition of Jewry at that point in time. Now, I think Oliver Cromwell was sympathetic to the Jewish cause, partly because of his tolerant leanings, but chiefly because he foresaw the importance for English commerce of the participation of the Jewish merchant princes, some of whom had already made their way to London. Now, at this juncture, I think the English would give Jewish people full rights in the colony of Suriname, which they had controlled since 1650. And I think there's some robust debates among historians concerning whether Rabbi Menashe's motives for pursuing the readmission of Jews by England were primarily political or religious. So, but albeit as it may, he would be the, let's just say, the catalyst, definitely, within regards to it. Now, I think Itmar Schorsch, if I'm not mistaken, for example, had argued at the idea of England being a final place for the Jews to inhabit in order to bring about the coming of the Moshiach. I'm not too sure what the reasons for this was hardly present in the Hope of Israel, so that was not actually written there. But I think rather was developed by Rabbi Menashe later. I think it was in 1656 when he was in London in order to appeal English Christians with millenarian beliefs. I think Henry Michelin, on the other hand, in his latter in-depth detailed analysis of, like, say, the book, had striven to show that the Jewish messianic theme in it is also rather fundamental to its, let's say, initials of itself, which is very, very interesting. So, I think it was in November 1655, Rabbi Menashe arrived in London. During his absence from Netherlands, the Amsterdam rabbis excommunicated Baruch Spinoza, who apparently was Rabbi Menashe ben Israel's student. And in London, Rabbi Menashe published his humble address to the Lord Protector. Very interesting enough. I think some of the, let's say, most notable statesmen, lawyers and theologians of the day were summoned to this conference to discuss. I think there was a conference of the Whitehall Conference, if I'm not mistaken, which Cromwell summoned, if I'm not mistaken. The chief practical result was a declaration of Judges Glynn and Steele that there was no law which forbade the Jews return to England, as they had been expelled by the royal decree of King Edward I, and not by formal parliamentary action. Jewish people remained in England. They lived under constant threat of expulsion, though nothing was done to regularize the position of the Jews, I believe, at that point in time, if I'm not mistaken. The doors opened, I think, for their eventual return, and on December 1655, someone named John Evelyn, it was on 14th of December, he entered in his diary, "Now were the Jews admitted." When Prime and others attacked the Jews, Rabbi Menashe wrote his major work, the Vindicia Judaeorum. This was in 1656 in response. Rabbi Menashe ben Israel stayed in England for close to 2 years after Whitehall Conference. During this time, he obtained written permission for the resettlement of Jews in England. Although he failed in this endeavour, during his stay, he met with a large number of influential figures of the age, including Cambridge theologian Ralph Cudworth, Henry Oldenburg, Robert Boyle and his sister Adam Borrow, John Sadler, John Jury and Samuel Hartley, as well as more marginal prophetic figures such as Ambrose Marnes and Arise Evans. Robert ben Israel's stay was managed by the millennial philosopher-mite, I think, baptism clergyman Henry Jesse. This was reported over here in Wikipedia. Now, Robert Menashe's wife, I think Rachel, was a descendant of the Abarbanel family, interestingly enough. And I think some say that the Abarbanels, according to legend, were descendants of King David, and he was proud of his children's Davidic ancestry. Both Rabbi Menashe's sons preceded their father. Menashe's eldest son was Samuel Abarbanel Suira, also known as Samuel ben Israel, who worked as a printer and assisted his father with matters in England. I think he died also in 1657. And Rabbi Menashe's younger son Joseph sadly passed away at 20. I think in 1650 there was a very unsuccessful business trip to Poland. Rabbi Menashe also had a daughter, Grecia, who was born in, so I think that's when he passed away, Menashe's son. Rabbi Menashe had a daughter, Gracia, who was born in 1628. She would marry Samuel Abarbanel Barbosa in 1646. I think died in 1690. That's interesting. I think Moses Jacob Ezekiel, he's an American sculptor, in his autobiography claimed to be a descendant of Menashe ben Israel. I don't know if it's confirmed or not, this claim, according to Wikipedia over here, but that's actually written over here. Now, it's actually interesting. Other great rabbis in the Netherlands at that point in time, Rabbi Isaac Aboab de Fonseca, rabbi we've spoken about on various occasions in this series. He was born in 1605. He passed away in 1693. He was a rabbi. He was a great scholar. He was a Kabbalist and a religious writer. In 1656, he was one of the several elders with the Portuguese Jewish community in Amsterdam, and for a time in Dutch Brazil before the Portuguese reconquest. He was one of the religious leaders that would go on to excommunicate Baruch Spinoza, as we mentioned before. That was in 1656. There's a famous portrait, I think, of Rabbi Isaac Aboab de Fonseca, of a translation of the Torah in Spanish with the commentary of his, if I'm not mistaken. So he was born in Castro Daire in Portugal. He passed away in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. He was 88 years of age. He would have children, including Judith Aboab de Fonseca, another famous person, and Rabbi David Aboab de Fonseca. His father was Rabbi David, and his mother was Isabel de Fonseca. Very interesting enough. So he was born into the Aboab family, which was a famous family in the Portuguese town of Castro Daire. As Siamo de Fonseca, his family and parents were conversos, Jews who had been forcibly converted to Christianity. The family, I think, had ostensibly converted to Christianity. This did not put an end to local anti-Semitic suspicions. I think in 1581, the Dutch Republic seceded him from the Spanish Empire. This caused significant migration of Sephardic Jews to the Netherlands to practice Judaism in open. I think in 1612 was when Isaac was 7. The family moved to Amsterdam. From that moment on, the family reconverted or became Jewish again, or openly. And Rabbi Isaac was raised as a Jewish person from that moment on, together with Menashe ben Israel. He would study under the great rabbi, poet, mathematician Rabbi Isaac Uziel. Uziel would open a Talmudic school of his own. And Rabbi Aboab and Rabbi ben Israel would have robust debates with regards to writing of Rabbi Joseph Solomon del Medigo, if I'm not mistaken, at that stage in time. When he was 18, Rabbi Isaac was appointed a Chacham, a rabbi for the Bet Israel synagogue, one of 3 Sephardic communities in Amsterdam, this was, which later I think would merge. And in order to, obviously, to be distinguished from his cousin Rabbi Isaac ben Mattia Aboab, he would add his mother's last name de Fonseca to his own. I think it was in 1642. Rabbi Aboab de Fonseca was invited, I think, by, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Cohen Henriquez, appointed rabbi at Kahal Sur Israel synagogue in Recife, in the Dutch Brazil. The Portuguese Jews from Amsterdam were a significant segment of European population, and many, I think, had first immigrated to Amsterdam, if I'm not mistaken. They were a significant segment of the European population, and they had, I think, first immigrated to Amsterdam due to, obviously, there was persecution at that point in time by the Portuguese Inquisition, and there was opportunities to pursue commerce in the Atlantic world. By becoming the rabbi of the Portuguese Jewish community in Recife, Rabbi Aboab de Fonseca was also probably one of the first appointed rabbis of the Americas, along with, I think he had a rabbinic companion, someone named Rabbi Moses Raphael de Aguilera, if I'm not mistaken. And what's interesting, I think the Kahal Sur Israel congregation had a synagogue, if I'm not mistaken, at that point in time. So everyone doing it. I'm just going to move position, friends. Anyone tuning in live, welcome to our community as we're exploring the Jewish community history of the Netherlands. So we're just going to place this over here. Just take a short 1-minute break. So a more comfortable location. And anyone tuning in live, welcome to our community as we, on this Sunday morning, exploring the Jewish community history of the Netherlands over here, part number 2, which is always a privilege to speak about, friends, over here. Okay, so what's interesting also, just to point out, Yeah, I think it's, yeah. He would be Rabbi Fonseca in Pernambuco, and the Portuguese would actually attach a Dutch colony. The Portuguese, who were, let's say, animated in part by Jesuit priests, who said, let's say, at that time, have their open synagogues there. It's a scandal of Christianity. He called for the reconquest of the colony and the destruction, I think, if I'm not mistaken, of the Jewish people. Unfortunately, you can see the anti-Semitism all throughout. The Portuguese reoccupied the capital of Recife in 1654. I think there was a struggle for 9 years, and the Jews fought alongside the Dutch army, which refused to surrender until the Portuguese guaranteed they would allow the safe passage of Jews and return to Amsterdam eventually. Some members of his community immigrated to North America and were among the founders of New Amsterdam. I think in Amsterdam, Rabbi Aboab de Fonseca was appointed chief rabbi for the Sephardic community there. In 1656, he was one of the several scholars who would excommunicate the philosopher Baruch Spinoza, let's say whom Rabbi Aboab knew first as a student in yeshiva, and then in the evening discussions with Rabbi Saul Levi Mortera, and I think it was Menashe and Aboab oversaw, if I'm not mistaken, at that point in time. Now, yeah, we can say more about him. I think Rabbi Aboab had a more Kabbalistic leanings. He published textual information on it. He was one of the many fervent Sephardic supporters in Amsterdam. I think this was reported over in 1655 of Messianic figure Shabtai Tzvi until the apostasy in September 1666. Obviously, he would veer totally against that. But this just quoting Wikipedia here within regards to that. During the tenure, let's say, Robert Aboab de Fonseca, the Sephardic community would flourish. There was the construction of the new Portuguese synagogue, the Esnoga, which was prompted by a sermon delivered by him in 1671. And I think it was inaugurated less than 4 years later, on August the 2nd, 1675. He died in Amsterdam, I think he was 88 years of age, in 1693. And he had great works, especially he translated from Spanish into Hebrew the works of the Kabbalists by Abraham Cohen de Herrera, and Sha'ar Shemaim and the Beit Elohim. Interesting enough. And I think much of his works was actually even printed recently, if I'm not mistaken, even in 2007. Now, who was Rabbi Isaac ben Mattathiah Aboab? He was another great rabbi. He died in 1720 and was an early 18th century rabbinic scholar, Hacham, of the Portuguese congregation in Amsterdam. He was born around 1650 in Amsterdam. His father, I think, was Rabbi Mattathiah Aboab, was a representative of the congregation of the Bet Jacob Mattathiah, and was cousin and a contemporary of Rabbi Isaac de Fonseca Aboab, now often confounded with him. In his early years, he became a friend and learned with William Surin Hoyasas, and later, I think there was a book of exhortation and admonition, I think, if I'm not mistaken. There was for his son, which appeared at Amsterdam in 1687, just reading Wikipedia, entitled the Extorcaya Paraka os Tementes do Senhor na Observanca dos Prosectios de sua lei. A number of his works, I think, exist in manuscript, among them a genealogy of the Aboab family and the Commedia de la Vida. If I'm not mistaken, he would die in 1720 in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam also. I'm going to speak about the famous Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam. Was at that point in time, I think it was from the 1670s, if I'm not mistaken, the Portuguese synagogue, also known as Esnoga or Snodge, located at Mr. Visser Plain 3 in central Amsterdam. The synagogue was completed, I think, in the 1670s. Esnoga is a word for synagogue in Judeo-Spanish, and the traditional Judeo-Spanish language of Sephardic Jews. Obviously, it's a Sephardic synagogue, and it was one of the largest and richest Jewish communities in Europe during the Dutch Gold Age. And their very large synagogue reflected this. I think the synagogue, obviously, is an active place of worship, and has been a popular tourist attraction since it was constructed in the late 17th century, when it drew, I think, Christian tourists from many countries. The congregation allowed, let's say, visitation of non-Jewish people, and its opulence was a reflection of the importance, let's just say, of sacred worship to the congregation, as well as signalling to all the wealth of the Portuguese Jewish community. The Sephardim, let's say, obviously the history comes from many of the old Sephardim that were expelled from Spain, but the Spanish royal Alhambra decree in 1492, many were given the choice of exile from Spain or conversion to Catholicism, or failing to do either, execution. Of Spain's estimated 250,000 Jews at the time, around half converted, many by coercion, others because of social and financial pressures would prevent their departure, and a few out of genuine religious conviction. They became Spanish Jewish origin, new Christian converters. I think of the other half of Spain's Jews who did not convert, they instead chose exile. Some would go to North African places, but some would cross the border to west of Portugal, if I'm not mistaken. That's when in Portugal Jewish life was interrupted only a few years later. There was also the Portuguese decree against Jews in 1496. While in theory the Jews now in Portugal who chose not to convert to Catholicism also had the option to be expelled or executed by 1497. The Portuguese king in practice blocked Portugal's ports of exit and subsequently reasoned that those who stayed behind agreed to become Christians by default. Thus the Jews in Portugal were forced to convert to Catholicism. And in 1496, after the decree, and all but a few who did manage to flee became Portugal's Jewish origin, new Christians or conversos. For the next few centuries, the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal continued. And some would practice Judaism in secret. Many, in fact, did continue to practice Judaism behind closed doors, while publicly professing by Catholics. I think in Spanish Portuguese, these were called Marranos. I'm just recording over here from Wikipedia. There was persecutions, there was trials, inquisitions, which would last since the 1700s. Both those crypto Jews who actively maintained Jewish practices in secret, also some sincere conversos or new Christians there were, but converted fully to Catholicism, were at times hounded, also persecuted, executed on charges of practicing Judaism. This was often, let's say, a pretext for the confiscation of their property. Many of them wished to have freedom of religion again, or to be free from this industrialization, anti-Semitism. Amsterdam then was one of the greatest in the world. The community offered various different things at that point in time, and especially in the 1600s, all the way to the 1800s. Once in Amsterdam, many Jewish people, as we said before, will openly return and publicly call themselves Portuguese Jews, and will even be proud that they came from Spain originally. And they were known as the first modern Jews, the Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam, because they were first to distinguish between religious and secular spheres of their individual and collective lives. Their religious life was focused primarily on the synagogue and the religious calendar of Jewish life. There was an eagerness to provide a Jewish education for their children. Early 17th Portuguese Jewish community of the nation at that point in time, which we spoke about before, where they would merge Talmud Torah, which you mentioned about before. In 1670, they purchased a site in Amsterdam and planned the construction of the large synagogue, which was inaugurated in 1675, which we're talking about here. The construction of the Portuguese synagogue, the Esnoga, was a heavy burden, let's say, on the congregation as a whole. I think it was in December 1670, the Sephardic Jewish community of Amsterdam would acquire the site, build the synagogue, and construction work began in April 1671. There was someone, Elias Bowman, he was an architect, and a synagogue was completed and opened with a grand ceremony. The design is based on the plans for King Solomon's Bet HaMikdash, the temple. The inscription above the entrance is from Psalm chapter 5, verse 8. In abundance of thy loving kindness will I come to thy house. The sign contains 1672, the year the building was intended to be completed, and Abu Wab, the name of the chief rabbi who initiated the construction project. And it's a beautiful building in itself. I think it's freestanding, rests with wooden piles, foundation vaults, can be viewed by boat from the canal water underneath the synagogue. The entrance to the main synagogue is off a small courtyard enclosed by low buildings, housing the winter synagogue, offices, archives, homes of various officials, a rabbinate, a mortuary, and noted Etz Chaim library. I think during 1955 to 1959, renovation, the former Etz Chaim seminary auditorium was actually established there at that point in time, if I'm not mistaken. The benches were taken from a synagogue originally built in 1639, and the Torah Ark from 1744. The Ark is made from solid, wood from Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a very famous synagogue. There's a library, a famous Etz Chaim library, we should point about. The Portuguese synagogue has one of the oldest Jewish libraries in the world, filled with original and rare texts, and constantly called upon from academic and rabbinical research. It was founded in 1616 and has been, let's say, housed in the historical complex of the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam since 1675. I think later in 1889, the private library of the then librarian David Montesinos was donated to Etz Chaim, and the library had been known since then as Etz Chaim Livraria Montesinos. And I think in the 1940s, the library's contents were shipped to Germany by the Nazis, but the books were returned to the Netherlands after the war. And the books were sent to Israel in 1979 and returned to Amsterdam in 2000. In 2003, the library, totaling 500 manuscripts and 30,000 printed works, was added by UNESCO to the Memory of the World International Register, which recognized documentary heritage of global importance. And in 2014, in partnership with the National Library of Israel, a majority of manuscripts were digitized, making the catalogue available online. Let's speak about some more famous rabbis that will make an imprint in the Netherlands. Rabbi Joseph Solomon Del Medigo, who was also known as Yashar Mikwanda, another rabbi we've spoken about. He passed away in 1655. He was born in 1591. He was a rabbi, he was an author, a physician, a mathematician, and a music theorist he happened to have been. And he was a descendant of Ella Del Medigo. Very interesting enough. He would move eventually to Padua in Italy and study medicine and taught classes with Galileo Galilei in astronomy. He graduated in 1630 and moved to Venice. He spent a year in the company of Rabbi Leon de Modena and Rabbi Simon Luzzatto. From Venice, he went back to Candia, and he was traveling in the Near East. He reached Alexandria and Cairo. I think he went into a public contest in mathematics against a local mathematician. From Egypt, he would move to Istanbul. There he would observe the comet of 1619. After Istanbul, he wandered along the various Karaite communities in Eastern Europe and arrived in Amsterdam in 1623. Interesting enough, I think he passed away just before he was 65. It could be he died in a plague, if I'm not mistaken. And I think there was a celebration of lights at the Stronova synagogue. But wherever he sojourned, he earned his living as a physician or a teacher and was known for his works Elim, the Palms, dealing with mathematics, astronomy, the natural sciences, and so on and so forth. I think in his book he followed the lectures by Galileo Galilei, as we mentioned about before, and much can be said within regards to him. I think the book, the Elim, is written in Hebrew in response to 12 general and 70 specific religions and scientific questions sent to Del Medigo by a Karaite Jew, Zerach ben Natan from Troki, I think Lithuania. The format of this book is taken from the number of fountains and palm trees at Elim in the Sinai Peninsula. And the book, I think, was heavily censored, if I'm not mistaken. Only 4 of the 12 major problems appeared in the published work. Subjects would include astronomy, physics, mathematics, medicine, music theory, and in the area of music, I think he discusses the physics of music, including, you'd say, resonance, intervals, and proportions. I think we actually recorded a video about him just before the Jewish festival of Sukkot a few days before, so I recommend everyone to look at it. Apparently he argued that the Jews did not take part in the scientific revolution because of Ashkenazi exclusive intellectual interest in the Talmud, apparently. Now, some of the parts of his book include the Mayan Khatum, which was a closed or sealed fountain, which the second part of the Sefer Elim, which contains 70 questions and answers. Mayan Ganim, continuation of Sefer Elim, if I'm not mistaken. Very interesting. The Chukot Shemayim, which is a part of Mayan Ganim, and the Gvurot Hashem, which is a treatise on astronomy. He also wrote a defense of the Kabbalah called the Matzref LaChochma, if I'm not mistaken, against, let's say, the attack upon it by his great-grandfather, Rabbi Eliyahu Del Medigo, if I'm not mistaken, over there. And very interesting. He was in contact in debates with famous Kabbalists of the time. He wrote a defense of the Kabbalah work called the Matzref LaChochma against the attack upon his great-grandfather, Rabbi Eliyahu Del Medigo. In the preface of the book, the publisher writes that the author himself admitted once that he was apparently young, 18 years of age, when he went to study in the University of Padua. According to Wikipedia, he used to mock the Kabbalah, if I'm not mistaken. But when he turned 27, he changed his heart when he met 2 great philosophers, Rabbi Yaakov ibn Nachmias, Rabbi Shlomo Aravi, who were also firm adherents to the Kabbalah, and they showed him how closely it resembles the philosophy of Plato, since, let's say, then there was a renewed spirit within them over there. Okay, so let's go back to the history of Portuguese Jews over here, within regards to that era of time. Now, what was the occupations and the professions of Portuguese Jews? Portuguese Jewish men had a narrow range of economic pursuits in the period of 1655 to 1669. but most of them were merchants at 72%. 498 of the nearly 693 men whose occupation was listed in the records. There was adjacent to merchants were 31 brokers. They were scattering of other professions, 22 teachers, 10 physicians, surgeons, 10. Topping the list, there were skilled diamond cutters and polishers, I think 20 of them, and men connected to the tropical products of tobacco, with 13 retail tobacconists and 13 tobacco workers. Famous physicians include Samuel Abarbanel, David Nieto, Elijah Montalto, the Buono family. Joseph Buono was consulted in the illness of Prince Maurice in April 1623. Jews were admitted as students to the university, where they studied medicine as the only branch of science that was of practical use of them. They were not allowed to practice law because lawyers were required to take a Christian oath, thereby excluding him, I think, at that point in time. Very, very interesting. So, Jews were also excluded from the trade guilds, as in 1632, resolution passed by the city of Amsterdam, I think, and the Dutch cities were largely autonomous. And I think there was practical certain trades: printing, bookselling, selling meat, poultry, groceries, and medicines, if I'm not mistaken. In 1655, there was a famous Sephardic Jew was exceptionally permitted to establish a sugar refinery using chemical methods reported over. Very, very interesting. So I think there was a number of notable Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam, as I mentioned before, in the 17th century. Rabbi Saul Levi Mortaria, he was a rabbi and anti-Christian polemicist. His rival was a much more well-known Amsterdam rabbi, Rabbi Menashe ben Israel. He was known for corresponding widely with Christian leaders and helped to promote Jewish resettlement in England. The most famous philosopher who was for excommunication, obviously we mentioned in the previous class, was Baruch Spinoza, also known as Benedictus de Spinoza, who was born and raised in a Portuguese Jew in Amsterdam, was excommunicated from the Jewish community in 1656. He openly rejected rabbinical authority. He, let's say, expressed unorthodox ideas concerning the nature of God, questioned the divine origin of Scripture, and rejected the Mosaic law, we have to point out over here. He published a major portion of his ideas anonymously in Latin in 1670, but following his death in 1677, apparently his entire corpus was published and widely circulated. That's reported here according to Wikipedia over there. Let's talk about the Jewish women of that period of time. Jewish women, as with most non-Jewish women at the time, generally did not participate in the workforce outside the domestic interior. There is some data on women immigrants. In the early years of the community formation, there was a scarcity of brides, so men sought eligible women in other communities, I think, other Jewish communities. I think Antwerp was a source for brides, and they appear to have been of higher status, let's just say, than the Jewish women born elsewhere, using literacy rates as a way to inferior status. The percentage of illiterate women between 1598 to 1699 was lowest among those. 3 out of, I'm not too sure how many, 7.3% in Antwerp. Hamburg was second lowest rate at 18.2%. Amsterdam-born women were the largest number, with 227 out of 725 of, let's say, 31+%, which compared favorably with Dutch Amsterdam women at 68%. A source for discerning literacy in the marriage register, where literacy could be assisted. The decline, let's say, of literacy of Amsterdam-born Jewish women may be due to the undervaluation of women's literacy, if I'm not mistaken, at that point in time. So, yeah, that's very, very interesting. There were no, I think, prohibitions on Jews participating in economic activity, and Portuguese Jewish merchants were prominent in Amsterdam. The city prospered because of religious toleration, which I think Spinoza would actually praise in one of his writings, if I'm not mistaken. This one, they became, I think, established. They brought new trading expertise and commercial connections to the city. They brought navigation knowledge and techniques from Portugal, which enabled the Netherlands to start competing in overseas trades, let's say, with the Spanish and Portuguese colonies. Jews of Portuguese nation worked in common cause with the people of Amsterdam and contributed, let's say, materially to the prosperity of the country. They were strong supporters of the House of Orange and were protected by the stadtholder. During the 12 years truce, the commerce of Dutch Republic increased considerably, and a period, let's say, of strong development ensued. This was particularly true for Amsterdam, where the Maranos had established their main, let's say, ports of operations over there. The Sultan of Morocco had an ambassador at The Hague named Samuel Pelagi, through whose mediation in 1620 a commercial understanding was reached with the Barbary states, if I'm not mistaken. The Sephardic Jews of Amsterdam were also established trade relationships with other countries in Europe. In the 1620s, numerous Jews emigrated from Holland to Lower Elbe region. There was a letter in 25 of November 1622 by King Christian the Fourth of Denmark, invited Jews to Amsterdam to settle in Glückstadt, where, among other privileges, they were assured free exercise of religion. There was a trade relationship between Dutch and Spanish Caribbean of South America and by Iberian Jews. They also contributed to establishing a Dutch West Pacific Company in 1621. Some would set on the dictorate. The ambitious schemes of the Dutch for the conquest of Brazil were carried into effect by Francisco Ribeiro, a Portuguese captain who is said to have held Jewish relations in Holland. And the Sephardic Jews of Amsterdam strongly supported the Dutch Republic in its struggle with Portugal for the possession of Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, over there, which is very interesting. And I think it was, more convinced. I think 1642, about 600 Jews left Amsterdam for Brazil, accompanied by, obviously, the great rabbis, Rabbi Isaac Aboab de Fonseca and Rabbi Rafael de Aguila. After the Portuguese regained the territory that Netherlands had taken in the sugar-growing region around Recife in 1654, they sought refuge in other Dutch colonies, including the island of Curaçao in the Caribbean and New Amsterdam, Manhattan, in North America. Other famous people that were connected to Amsterdam. Let's talk about Rabbi Samuel Abarbanel Hanassi, also spelled Abarbanel. He passed away in 1551. Obviously a prominent Sephardic Italian financier, academic, a supporter of Italian Jewry. He was famous later on in Amsterdam. He was actually born in Lisbon, Portugal, to the Abarbanel family. Samuel was the youngest of three sons. His father, Isaac Abarbanel, was a notable Portuguese Jew. In the early years, his father sent him to Salonika to learn Talmud. He became a student of Joseph Nassia, I believe. Later moved to Naples. He was employed as a chief financer of the Viceroy Don Pedro de Toledo. It was during, I think, this time that Samuel amassed a great fortune, becoming richer than anyone in his immediate family. And he would later, I think, marry Benvenida Barbanel. However, the two had to move to Ferreira in 1541. The Napoleon government banned Jews from the city. It was in Ferreira that the couple began to support several Jewish institutions. Their home became a favorite resort for Jewish and Christian scholars alike, such as David ben Yahan and Baruch of Benevento. The poet Samuel Uske famously said that Samuel Abarbanel deserved the surname Tremegisto, meaning thrice great, because Samuel was great in scholarship, great in name, and great in wealth. Stating that he generously employs his wealth in promoting the welfare of his co-religionists, he enables many orphans to marry, supports the needy, and endeavors strenuously to free captives, so that in him are combined all the great qualities which make one fitted for the great prophecy. And Samuel died in 1551, I think, in Ferreira. Now, Rabbi David Nieto, he was another one that would make a big imprint on Amsterdam, Holland Jewry. He was also the rabbi of the Spanish Chacham, the Spanish-Portuguese Jews community in London. Later, obviously, succeeded in his capacity by his son, Robert Isaac Nieto. So he was born in Venice. He practiced as a physician. He officiated as a Jewish preacher in Livorno, in Italy. He wrote a famous Italian work entitled the Pascologica. This was in Cologne in 1702. He dealt with differences of calculation in calendars of Greek, Roman and Jewish churches, demonstrated the error which had crept into the calendar from, I think, 1692 until 1692, from the First Council of Nicaea. In 1702, he succeeded Rabbi Solomon Ayalon as a chief, let's say, Spanish-Portuguese rabbi. And 2 years after his settlement in that city, he published his theological treatise, the Della Divina Providencia, I think. This was in 1704 in London. He explained that nature was a modern word and reality referred to the action of God in governing, let's say, natural phenomena. I think this work provoked some opposition against him, including accusations of Spinozism, if I'm not mistaken. But some of the accusers were believed to be heretics motivated by their support for Shabtai Tzvi. And I think Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi, who we'll speak about in the next class, was called as an arbitrator, decided in his favor. I think it's response number 18 in the Chacham Tzvi. He was highly praised for his teachings. Rabbi Nietzsche was also highly praised by Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azilei, the Chida. And I think he died, if I'm not mistaken, in London and is buried in the Bellows Cemetery in Mile End, I have to point out over here. He was a powerful controversialist I think in London 1714, Matadan, written in Hebrew and Spanish on the model of the Ksari of Rabbi Judah Halevi. He defended the oral Torah against the Karaites and showed that the disagreements in Talmud lay not in essential laws but in minor matters, if I'm not mistaken. He also waged war unshrinkingly on supporters of the Sabbatean heresies, which he regarded as dangerous to the best interests of Judaism. In this connection, wrote the Eshtat against Nehemiah Chayun, who was also seen as supporter of the Sabbatean movement, and we spoke about him also on various occasions. Rabbi Nietzsche was one of the most accomplished Jews of his time, and was equally distinguished as a philosopher, a physician, a poet, a mathematician, and an astronomer, and a theologian, I believe, over there. He had various prolific writings also, and was the first to fix the time for the beginning of the Shabbat Eve for the latitude of England. He had, including among his bibliography, was the Della Divina Providencia, which was printed in London, the Los Tronfios, which was in Pangrico, another publication in London in 1710, Risposkita al Sermon, Matadan was in 1714 London, Eshtat, 1715 London, and other books also would actually come out. Another famous rabbi that would make an imprint, let's just say, in Amsterdam, an early rabbi, was Elijah Montalto. He lived between 1567 to 1616. He was about 49 years of age when he passed away. He was a polemistic and a physician from Paris who became a personal physician of Maria di Medici. He was raised Christian in Portugal and openly returned to Judaism on settling in Venice. And I think his suitable and incontrovertible propositions was an anti-Christian polemic. He was one of the teachers of Joseph Solomon del Medico. And when Montalto died, Rabbi Saul Levi Mortero went to Paris to recover his body for burial in Amsterdam, the Jewish cemeteries in Amsterdam. I'm not sure if he himself was a rabbi or not, so that I'll have to double check. Another great Dutch rabbi that was born in Salonika was Rabbi David Harder. He lived between 1591 to 1657. He was a Chacham. He was born in Salonika to Rabbi Joseph and Rabbinate Reina in the second half of the 16th century. He went with his father to Amsterdam, where he became a Chacham of the Bet Yisrael congregation, which was founded in 1618. The congregation was consolidated in 1639 with two congregations in Amsterdam, and Rabbi Pardo was appointed to Chacham together with Rabbi Isaac Abu Abda Fosenko and Rabbi Menachem in Israel, I believe. And Rabbi Saul Levi Mortier. Remember, these were great rabbis. He was a trustee of the Jewish cemetery and a chazan of the Bikur Cholim organization. And in 1652, he founded the Honen Dalim Benevolent Society. He passed away in Amsterdam in 1657, so he was about 66 years of age. He published in Amsterdam a transcription in Latin, characteristic of Tzaddik ben Joseph's Foreman's Obligation de los Coracons, a translation of the Chavot Levavot into Judeo-Spanish. I think in 1619 he married Rachel Sanchez. She was born herself in 1595. They had three children, Joseph, Josiah, and Sarah Pardo. Josiah would be the rabbi of Caracao, of Puerto Rico in Jamaica. We'll speak about him in a minute. He himself died in 1657 and was buried in Bet Hayim of Ouderkerk on de Amstel. So it was Rabbi Joseph Pardo. He was a chazan. He lived between 1624 to 1677. He was an English chazan, and he appears to have gone to London from Amsterdam, where his father David was rabbi. He wrote the Shulchan Tahor. That's a compendium of the first two parts of Rabbi Yosef Kara's Code of Jewish Law, which is edited by his son, if I'm not mistaken. And I think, and he was key rabbi there. I think he would write a book which was printed in Amsterdam, eventually in Frankfurt on Main, and had notes by famous Rabbi Moses Israelis in 1713, if I'm not mistaken. He was married and had two children, Rachel, who married Isaac, the son of someone named Rabbi Emmanuel, if I'm not mistaken, And Rabbi David, very interesting. Now, he passed away in 1677 at Amsterdam, was buried in the same grave as his grandfather, Rabbi Joseph Pardo, at Bet Haim of Oudekerk on the Amstel. Another, Rabbi Josiah Pardo, who was he? He was another Dutch rabbi, lived between 1626 to 1684. He was a Chacham. He served as Rabbi in Willemstad, Kerkeo in Port Royal, Jamaica. And let's say he was one of the first rabbis who settled in the New World and a pioneer of many Jewish communal and education institutions in the Western Hemisphere. He got married to the daughter of Rabbi Saul Levi Mortira, named Rabbanit Sarah, and they would have a child, Saul Pardo, also known as Saul Brown, if I'm not mistaken. He passed away. He died in Port Royal. He was about 58 years of age, and he was involved with not that just a Kurakio synagogue, also Mikveh Israel synagogue, if I'm not mistaken. He was born in 1626 in Amsterdam to Rabbi David Pardo and Rabbanit Rachel Sanchez. He originated from prominent Sephardic rabbinical family of Venice, Amsterdam, and Saloniki. And Joseph Pardo, who mentioned about before, was born in Saloniki. He was a great rabbi. Now, Rabbi Josiah was a teacher at the Yeshiva de Los Pintos in Rotterdam, which was transferred to Amsterdam in 1669. He was a Chacham of the Honen Dalim Benevolent Society. He immigrated to Kurakio. He became a Chacham in 1674. He served as a first leader of the Congregation Mikveh Israel in Kurakio for 9 years. And he established a school and several other institutions of the community. And he was the first rabbi in America and Western Hemisphere at that point in time. Was Rabbi Isaac Aboab de Fonseca, who became a rabbi of Pernambuco in Brazil in 1642. And Josiah Pardo was apparently the first one who settled outside Brazil over there. In 1683, Rabbi Josiah departed to Jamaica, which was an unusual decision since the Kurakio Jewish community was economically better off at that time. Possibly a conflict with influences, Parnasim of the Mikveh Israel community, was the reason for the departure. I think in the 1670s, Port Royal had a reputation of censor of piracy. Synagogue on the Jewish Street of Port Royal was built at 1677. I think, very, very interesting. And much more can be said about him. I think it was in the year 1691, apparently, the Jews of Kurakio introduced special memorial prayer, or Hashchaba, for Josiah, Rabbi Josiah, if I'm not mistaken, over there. So that's very interesting. I think Hebrew quotes of the second book of Kings in 22:20, verse 2. Josiah did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in all the way of David his father, and turned not aside to the right hand or to the left. Very interesting enough. So his son, Rabbi Saul Pardo, died in 1702. He moved to New York, where he was the first Chazan of the first New York Jewish congregation, Sherit Yisrael, if I'm not mistaken. Over there, very, very interesting enough. And he returned to Kurakio to join his aunt Rachel Duval, who was either Josiah's sister-in-law or a half-sister from the first marriage of his father, if I'm not mistaken. Now let's speak about the Curiel family quickly, and then we're going to call it a day. It was Jacob Curiel, or Dom Jacob Curiel. He lived between 1587 to 1664. He was a Sephardi Jewish merchant, a diplomat and nobleman. He was born in Portugal. He passed away in Germany in 1664. And very interesting. He was educated at the University of Coimbra and the University of Bologna. In 1618, he was acquired historically significant Tanakh in Pisa. Around 1620, he lived in Florence, where his son Moses Curiel was born. Around 1627, the family moved to Hamburg, Germany. Until 1640, he served as an agent to the Iberian Union, but then chose for the Portuguese crown. And in June 1641, Jacob Curiel was ennobled by John IV of Portugal. 1645, his son Moses Curiel was appointed an agent of the Portuguese crown in Amsterdam. Solomon Curiel, Moses Curiel's son, assumed the position of agent of the Portuguese crown in Hamburg after his father passed away in 1697. Who was Moses Curiel? Don Moses Curiel passed away in 1697. Another key figure of the family. And he was also a Jewish nobleman, a diplomat, a wealthy merchant, traded in diamonds, sugar and tobacco. And he was born in Florence. He was the eldest son of Jacob Curiel. And 1627, the family moved to Hamburg. He was sent to be educated at the Protestant Heidelberg University in Heidelberg, Germany. In 1642, he moved to Amsterdam. served as an agent to the Portuguese crown from 1645 until his death. In 1654, he lived on St. Antonios Bristraat and got married to Rebecca Abbas. During his time in Amsterdam, he generally patronized Hebrew scholarship. He was a major contributor to the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, which was built in 1675. From around 1687, he lived along the Nieuwe Herengracht, where he had brought 2 plots in the year before. He was a close friend of William of Orange and housed him in Amsterdam on more than one occasion. The Curiel family is widely believed to have been one of the richest and most important families in Sephardic diaspora in northeastern Europe. A historian named Jonathan Israel in 1984 wrote a book charting Moses Curiel's life. An Amsterdam Jewish merchant of the Golden Age, if I'm not mistaken, Jeronimo Nunes da Costa, 1620 to 1697, agent of Portugal and the Dutch Republic. Another one, Nathan Curiel, who was he? He lived between 1666 to 1737. He was also a member of this famous family of a Portuguese crown in Amsterdam. He was born to Moses Curiel and Ribka Curiel, and I think there's speculation he was named Nathan after Nathan of Gaza, which is probably not a good thing in of itself. He was a notable Jewish theologian who was still alive at the time of Nathan Curiel's birth, if I'm not mistaken. So apparently it's reported over. So actually, I'm not too sure about the history of Nathan of Gaza, so I'll leave everyone to investigate whether it was a good thing or not over there. Now, Curiel had an early interest in botany and sponsored exploration to discover new flowers of the Far East. He introduced many new varieties of plants to the Portuguese court. Nathan Curiel had large gardens at his home in Amsterdam, and I think Jonathan Israel, the historian who mentioned about a few minutes ago, he actually writes, effort which went into cultivating fine gardens, we may conclude was yet another means of seizing the attention of visiting envoys and aristocrats. And I think Jonathan Israel notes that Curiel possessed a medieval illuminated Hebrew Bible of exceptional beauty, which his father Moses Curiel had purchased from a Spanish Jew from North Africa. According to Jonathan Israel, this Bible is considered the oldest and most venerable item possessed by Dutch Jewry reported over, which is very, very interesting. So I think this is a good synopsis to leave today. We spoke about, this is part number 2 of the history of the Netherlands Jewish community. It was a special edition over here today. So there's going to probably be another few more parts at least I think we're going to have. This is part number 2. We're going to speak more about like the emergence, let's say, of the Ashkenazic community in the next edition. We'll speak about more rabbis. We're going to go more into the deep 1700s territory over here in the next edition, and so on and so forth. So very, very great, very interesting. Friends over here, we are a community here. We're exploring the history of great rabbis that there were of yesteryear through all across the world, and just requesting from everyone, please subscribe to the channel. We are nearing at the moment a staggering 9,000 subscribers. The goal is to get to Tu B'Shvat, 15th of Shvat, with that number, which will be a phenomenal achievement if we can achieve that, friends, over here. Now, friends, as a community, we don't just record videos of historic videos of great rabbis of yesteryear. We also record videos within regards to biography videos of, let's say, famous rabbis from Ottoman places, from all over the world. We explore and we do so many other great things. Yeah, how's it going? And we are doing huge amounts. We're actually doing a special edition at the moment where we're exploring the Jewish community histories from various countries across the world also, which is another very, very exciting project. And we have an inspirational Jewish personality every single day that shares over some great wisdom for Am Yisrael, which is also a very exciting project over there. So I think we'll leave you to it. Wishing you all a fantastic day, friends. Take care and Shavua Tov and Baruch. Thanks for watching.